Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for a Friday night session talking about native plants with special guest speaker Gavin Schaefer of Kansas City, Missouri. Gavin is joining us for two sessions to talk about all things native plants, kind of the general history, what it is, etymology, etc., the bigger view. And then session two in September, he's going to be back talking about where would you go if you wanted to start planting native plants in this region and other regions, etc. Just kind of giving a little more deeper dive of if you wanted to start, how would you go about that? So, Gavin Schaefer, after graduating from Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri, with his degree in biology, he's worked as a botanist for the Missouri Department of Conservation and the Institute of Botanical Training. He has since joined Johnson County Parks and Rec office as a natural resource technician, conducting species inventories, invasive species removals, and prescribed fire. He volunteers his time tabling, teaching, and collecting seeds for nonprofit KC Wildlands and Deep Roots. You can find him birding, botanizing, lichening, mothing, and fishing in and around the Kansas City metro area. Gavin, thank you so much for taking the time to teach us about natives.
Of course. Thank you for the welcome. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and turn off my camera because my little Chromebook can't take it. So let me go ahead and do that. Stop video. And, and I want to confirm that everything is going smoothly on my end. Awesome. So you should be able to see it. And let me go ahead and get this started. So I hope to introduce you all to native plants conceptually tonight, and then how to go about their horticulture next session. And if you are listening to this on YouTube, if you join the Patreon for the Moran Academy for starting at $0.00, you can watch it live on September 19th. In the year of our Lord 2025. But again, you could watch it on YouTube like you are now, a week after that date. But really, the format for tonight is going to be an hour and a half in totality, with an hour of content, with half an hour of question and answer. So that just kind of heads up on what you're getting into, in case you're like, oh my gosh, an hour and a half. But this question right here is going to be everything tonight, which is, what is the ecology and natural history of where I live, where I, Gavin Schaefer, live in the Kansas City metro? In answering this question, I hope to give you all a format, a scale that you can apply to yourself if you don't live where I live, which may be the case. So I hope to answer this question to allow you to ask the right questions, to get warm, to answer things like, what is the ecology and natural history of where I live, which is a critical guiding principle to planting native. So there's going to be a lot of technical details. There is a lot of jargon. There's a lot of vocabulary. So why should you engage with these things? I think a major failure of science education is not tying ourselves to a reason why learn things like this that are hard. And for me, I quickly learned that I love learning this stuff because it keeps me sane. I feel like I don't even necessarily need to talk too much about on this in this slide, but when horrors beyond human imagination are delivered to our screens for ad revenue at any hour of the day, it really takes you out of it being like, oh, that's what bird that was. Oh, that's what rock I'm standing on. Oh, that's what's in bloom right now. It negates the horror of it all, not by taking you out of the world and what is going on, but taking you out of the senseless, directionless, helpless, spaceless, timeless place of the media sphere and putting you actually in the world, something that's actually really real, to where you've been and where you're going, where the birds are, where the birds will go. And I feel like that is a better way to engage with the world, and also engage with the hard parts of the world rather than from what we are given. And this kind of ties into the next slide, which is, learning is rad, learning is cool, learning is awesome. Learning is a radical thing to do. When our minds, attentions, passions, desires, wills, ideas, identities are both consumer and product, in the digital age, something fundamentally is happening to us because of it. And we're still engaging with that horizon. We don't know what's on the horizon, how we are being fundamentally changed, but we do know things like our attention spans and cognition are being greatly impacted, how we communicate with other people in the world, how we engage with the world, how we understand the world and approach it is fundamentally changing. And I feel like actually experientially learning something, engaging with something in a long form rather than just in a short form, is a reclamation of our attention and our desire and our will and our ideas and our passion. And not only do I want you to learn, because learning is rad, I want you to learn ecology. I want you to learn natural history. It's something that you will never stop learning because you can't learn it all. No one ever has. And it isn't just because ecology is this, dusty science of studying the abundance and distribution of organisms, though that is its textbook definition. It is thus calls into question the very fabric of life itself. Every subdiscipline of biology is called into question when we try to answer ecological questions. Even social sciences, like what are people's relationship with organisms? What are their perceptions of them? And not only can we put things into neat little boxes, though us monkeys really like doing that and also are very good at it, it's a way we can recognize in our own understanding animacy and power and phenomenon outside of ourselves. These things are happening with or without our understanding, but in the age of the Anthropocene, our understanding of these things dictates their fate often. In the age of industrialization, in modernity, where we are losing rapid amounts of habitat, our understanding of them and our ability to name them and identify them and explain why they're important is more critical than ever. So there's a power to a name and there is threats of erasure to the nameless. So it is for these reasons I think you should engage with this stuff, and it's also freaking cool. So what am I going to be doing to expel this information? I'm going to be using a sliding scale, not like a synergistic MLM scalable solution sort of sliding scale, an ecoregion. The concept of an ecoregion. What is an ecoregion? It is a land, it's an area that is self-similar in some way, whether it's biology, geology, hydrology, climate, whatever may have you, going beyond this vague definition I'm giving you right now. The EPA, RIP the EPA, the EPA has a system of ecoregions that it has adopted since the 1990s from James Omerick in his publication in 1987. Broadly, quickly, he was a cartographer, he was a biogeographer, he was a scientist that worked for the EPA that was primarily concerned with protecting aquatic ecosystems. You need a lot of map work, you need a lot of mapping to know these massive areas of watersheds. And so this system was developed beginning with the broadest scale, level 1, which there are 12 in the continental United States in the lower 48. And then there are level 4, which is all the way at the most specific, which there are 967 ecoregions. So you can really get really specific about what you're talking about at level 4. And so without further ado, using this sliding scale, where am I in the broadest sense? I am in the Great Plains, level 1 ecoregion, the Great Plains. This is a massive area. There's so many generalizations that are being made here. How could this place be all self-similar? It goes from Manitoba, Canada, Edmonton, Alberta, into northern Mexico, from eastern Colorado into Illinois. How could this place be self-similar in any sort of way? It is huge, even as level 1 ecoregions go. In order to tell the tale as to how this place could be possibly self-similar, we have to go back. When I say back, I mean way back. So, for example, this is a map of the world during the Miocene. So this is when hominids just first emerged. This is the time of the dinos during the Cretaceous, just about 20 million years before they got nicked by the KT extinction. This is how far back. The Carboniferous, 350 million years ago, just unfathomable amounts of time. And you notice where that little dot is, that's where the land that I'm on was. So much farther south of the equator, and it's also underwater. A lot of the Great Plains was underwater, and it was continuously underwater from this time all the way up into the Cretaceous at different periods. And so this is evidenced by fossilized organisms all across the Kansas City metro. This is an ammonite in the UMKC collection. And this is a gastropod I found in a creek, I believe in Parkville. So they're just freaking everywhere. And all across the Great Plains, this sedimentary geology is from this tropical inland sea, and it deposited sandstones, limestones, should be dolostones, dolomites, which can also be more metamorphosized limestones. This is covering my butt for geologists so they don't come get me. Shales and coals, and this is a road cut in Blue Springs where you can kind of see that darker layer below that lighter layer. That darker layer is about shale and some minor coal. That's when it's all just sediment. So it's abiotic material, which is just sediment from land. And that's when the ocean was much deeper. And then it got shallower as time went on, as millions of years passed. And that's all of that white stuff is limestone, and that's all biotic material. And that is one of the reasons why limestone is one of my favorite sedimentary rocks. But not only is it one of my favorite sedimentary rocks, but it is a really prevalent substrate through a lot of the Great Plains, and especially where I live in Kansas City. It is a biogenic rock, as I have mentioned. All these critters skittering about at the bottom of the ocean with things like shells or living rocks like corals, which are also animals, by the way. Their bodies contain a lot of calcium carbonate, and when they die, it deposits into the water and onto the ground, on the ocean floor, and it either precipitates out of the water chemically or literally just falls on the bottom, and it cements over time, creating this calcium carbonate rock, limestone. And it is thus really calcium rich, and it is also really high in pH. Though those are two chemical conditions that can probably sell like a fancy dancy water at like the airport, they're really chemically disruptive for plant material, for plant life by default. The chemical interactions that roots have to have with soil substrates are really interrupted and disrupted by these chemical conditions. So if you see a plant growing in a calcareous, calcium-rich condition, they're at least tolerant of it, if not outright adapted to it. And so much so that they may not be able to grow anywhere else. Like they crack the code and they're not able to go anywhere else now. Another thing about limestone is that it erodes with rainwater. So it creates crazy diverse topography and thus hydrology. So where water is running. So you can have things like sinkholes and caves and deep ravines that have been cut by streams. And all of this diversity and topography is what we call karst. And that's usually with the erosion of limestone specifically, but other calcareous rocks, I believe, are included in that. But that allows the structure for lots of niches to be filled. So diverse topography often equates into diverse life, diverse biodiversity. And so fast forwarding in time, now that we've set the bedrock, we're going to the Cretaceous, back up to that map that we were just at about 80 million years ago, right before the KT extinction. We had the collision of the North American plate and the Farallon plate. So this is a oceanic plate colliding on the western side under the Pacific with the North American plate and sublimating and creating the Rocky Mountains. Rocky Mountains, famously not in the Great Plains. What do they have to do with the Great Plains? A lot, actually. They dictate a lot. They dictate the climate because as air goes westward and is pushed farther up in elevation, it cools rapidly and loses the capacity to hold on to all this water and dumps it onto the Rocky Mountains. And the remaining air is really dry, so it casts a rain shadow. The Great Plains are under a massive rain shadow that dissipates as you go farther east. So not only that, but around the Cretaceous, this inland sea has finally drained the last time up to the modern era. And so you have this huge landlocked place, and it is just you, land, sky, and space. So you're getting temperatures below 0 degrees, you're getting temperatures above 100 degrees. There isn't an ocean nearby to be warm in the winter and cool during the summer. And so there's no regulation. It is just bare naked, right between you and space. You're getting all the temperatures. The government calls our climate severe. Like it's not even a Midwestern weather trope. It's like actually a relatively true thing. Another severe thing to have happened to this landscape is the glaciations that happened between 2.5 million years ago up to the last glacial maximum 12,000 years ago. And the one that happened here, or that got to about where I'm at, is the Kansan, but it stopped right at the Kansas and Missouri state line, right where Kansas City is. And we'll get to that eventually. But all of these objects, just so massive, are their physics function differently than you would imagine just like a heavy boulder. There's so much mass, there's so much density and pressure being exerted on the bottom of these objects that it allows them to slide, to move, and move they did. They scoured and scraped the earth, picking up rock and sediment and carrying it for hundreds of miles to deposit it where they eventually stop and melt. So the Pleistocene glaciation has a massive influence on a lot of this region, and not only on a lot of the region was literally under an amount of ice, but whenever you have a huge ice block just north of you, it's going to be a really cold place to live. And not only is it a cold place to live, but globally we're in an ice age. So a lot of the environments that are now, the Ozarks and the dusty hot plains were really barren and cold environments. We actually have fossilized trees from the past, some 10,000s of years in the banks of Kansas creeks being pulled out every other year. So it's really interesting to see how quickly these ecosystems change through deep time. And as these glaciers receded, they had all this ground up sediment that they had ground up on the bottoms of them, and also sediment that they had picked up. And so after they fully receded and dried, and all these glacial outwashes had fully melted and dried, you had all this fine dust left over. And all that fine particulate is what we call periglacial, and it was picked up by the wind and deposited in places, and that's what we call loess. Kind of a fun word, loess, Loess, loess. And it can erode into really steep topography. If you're driving on 210, just north of Kansas City, or on 435 or 635, you can see them on the road cuts. They're that color. They're super kind of pink, kind of pinky to orange to kind of tan. Very interesting. So all of these factors combined create this really hostile environment that woody plants have a difficult time living in. I mean, you're getting all these temperatures. You're not getting a lot of water, that being really the chief of them. And on all the sedimentary rock, grasses fill the niche that would otherwise be fulfilled by forest trees and canopy trees to compose most of the biomass of this land that has now been exposed post glaciation. And they quickly radiate. And grasses did this thing within the past 60 million years. Grasses have been a thing for 60 million years. They did this thing where they can photosynthesize. Some of them can photosynthesize differently than most plants can by default. So most plants by default have this C3 chemical pathway, but some grasses have a C4 photosynthetic pathway, which alters the chemistry, the biochemistry, and also just the physical structure of their of their tissues. And this allows their reproductive cycle to move farther into the summer. So that's why most of the prairie grasses are warm season, really taking off in May and blooming, and grasses are flowering plants, blooming in September and August. So it's just a beautiful landscape that is really rugged and really crazy and really severe. And this is a bit of a chicken and egg. All of these organisms, grasses, herbivores, all were extant in other parts. But when they all came together, there were all these components coming together, and the emergent property of it are these relationships, which are the grazing animals of the Great Plains. Where I am, there were white-tailed deer, still are so many. Elk, there are no more, and bison, which there are very few left. But the bison are really critical for the Great Plains. Their grazing pressure, recycled material, deposited nitrogen, and critically, they have this funny habit that no other grazer really has where we are, is creating a wallow, which is a habitual rolling. They pick this spot that they like, they pee in it, they roll around in it, they smell like pee. I'm pretty sure they just like it. Depressing the ground over time, and you can find them decades long after they've been extirpated from the region. And we're pretty sure this is why there are amphibians in Kansas, period. Salamanders, frogs, they are there likely just solely because bison rolled around a lot. And now we have these small little micro wetland habitats that foster this biodiversity. And another fun little amphibian fact, the prairie crayfish, not an amphibian, an invertebrate, is a terrestrial animal. We have terrestrial crayfish that live out of water and live underground, and they live in the Central Plains. If you go out in like a hot, rainy June night, you can find the males like wandering around the dark, like it's wild. And they dig these little holes, and then eventually they'll leave. And then squatters' rights will get claimed by this frog, the crayfish frog, a congener species to the bullfrogs. It's a pretty big frog, and you can hear them. They're not uncommon. You don't see them a lot because they're squatting on former prairie crayfish holes. So just a really funny dynamic that happens out here. Predators. We used to have a diverse set of predators: badgers, coyotes, which we still have. The black-footed ferret, though really cute, really ferocious, and also critically endangered. Wolves, birds of prey, cats like the mountain lion, black bears, and venomous snakes like the timber rattler. Rumor has it, grizzly bears may have made it all the way down here, strictly in the little riparian areas along the rivers. Supposedly, that's the rumor. But we had a huge set of predators that predated and checked the grazing pressure of these creatures like the white-tailed deer and the buffalo. Grassland birds are so critical. They're such a critical component of these ecosystems. Grasshopper sparrows, dick thistles, upland sandpipers, the great prairie chicken. These are all species whose number amongst all the birds that are having declines are having the worst declines. They are critical species for conservation. And then to wrap it all up, all of this material that is accumulated in this prairie and in this grassland environment that has grazing, that has all of these ecological relations with all these animals, has a really severe climate with a really dry winter and a really cold winter. Despite it being cold, it gets really, really, really dry. And so you have this grassland with all this dry material with a lot of wind. Thus, whenever anything were to spark, it would catch fire. So the best fire conditions are in the dormant season, where it likely would have happened most often, which was in that dormant window between November, December, and January with all this dry material. We also, post-glaciation, have a really convective atmosphere. So that meaning there's a lot of thunderstorms and there's a lot of lightning in the Great Plains, as people in Oklahoma can attest. And those lightning strikes would have likely caused fires in the spring. And then we have every once in a while these really stochastic events, these really dramatic once in 100-year events where you really get this dry environment during the summer, like especially late August, and it's fried a lot of the plant material. And you can get a prairie fire in the middle of the summer, like August and September. Marty Robbins has a song about one in Nebraska. Cultural practices, though, were the main driver of pyrrhic activity on the Great Plains. And that is likely why most of the Great Plains is dependent on fire. Not only did it burn, but it needed to burn in order to recycle material to keep woodies out, in order to maintain nutrient cycles. And this brings in the question of who was here. People have been here essentially the entire time there have been post-glacial ecosystems. We have evidence of the Hopewell culture, which was this complex trading network that spanned nearly all of the eastern North America, that had complex trading routes and agriculture and physical cultures that occupied Sibley, Missouri. At least we know of. We have 2 Hopewell sites in Sibley, Missouri, from 200 BC to 500 CE, which is right up to the end of the Hopewell culture. And after that dissipated and collapsed, we now have the tribes that in modernity that we now recognize inhabited this area: the Kanza, the Osage, the Otos, the Kickapoo, and Missouri, whose name is the Sioux name. And then we also have a couple of places that are named after indigenous peoples in the KC Metro, of people that actually aren't indigenous here. Wyandotte and Shawnee, if that rings a bell for anyone, were actually from the Great Lakes and the eastern woodlands and were displaced here post-colonization. So just a little look into the indigenous people that inhabited this area and set fire to improve places for hunting grounds. It decreases the number of ticks in these grasslands. There's plenty of reasons that we can pontificate as to why they set them. But if you really want to get to the heart of why is this being mentioned, Great Plains people were here pre-glaciation. And all these ecosystems, including the tall grass prairie and the Great Plains in general, are all post-glacial. So that means that every ecosystem, an essential component of the faunal assemblage of the Great Plains, are people. People are inexorably tied to the ecosystems in the central United States and in North America. And so there's nearly no ecosystem that was without human influence. And if you want to find out more about these people in detail, I refer you to a wonderful podcast by KCUR, People's History of Kansas City. There's this episode called Where Missouri Got Its Name, dispelling the myth that the Missouri are an extinct, quote unquote, people. They're still alive, still around, and have things to say about it. Native-land.ca if you want to find out what people inhabited the land that you're now on. And this is a global system. And more specific to the region, to where we're at, Edible Wild Plants of the Prairie by Dr. Kelly Kincher out of KU. He just put out his second edition. This is talking about the usages of these plants that are in the ethnobotanical history of some of these species. And then more about people's relationship with the prairie and the Great Plains. Doug Ladd, the wizard Doug Ladd, has a wonderful lecture hosted by MPF over this subject. So human occupation is an integral part of the Great Plains. And now that we have referred to and have built the foundation of all of these awesome, formidable forces that have defined massive amounts of area, let us go now to the next question. Where am I in the Great Plains? There's like a couple of options. I'm in that one, the temperate prairies. Temperate prairies, it's a really weird, like gerrymandered shape, maybe gerrymandered too soon. It spans from Alberta, Canada, and around Edmonton down into Oklahoma. But that thin little strip of area just defines the physiological limit of woody species. As we get to the farther eastern edges and we get more rain, and as we get to the northern edges where we get decreased temperatures, this lignification of tissue, the development of the protein lignin, and the development of wood becomes much easier. So this is all that there is really here with the temperate prairie region, is that it's a climate that allows woody species to actually do okay. But I would be absolutely remiss if I did not mention the tall grass prairie, which is a plant community type, an ecosystem that occurs for a vast amount of the temperate prairie region. And thus, I think it's really important that we talk about it, especially where we live. Tall grass prairie is often the language that is used at this scale to refer to, oh, I live in this ecoregion. The tall grass prairie is a really good use of language. But what is the tall grass prairie? The tall grass prairie is the most eastern edge of the prairie. As you go farther into the rain shadow, you go from tall grass to mixed grass to short grass. And it's exactly what you think it is. You just decrease in height and you decrease in diversity. Tall grass prairie is the most diverse and most productive prairie type within the central United States and within North America, excluding some of the grasslands in California. There's grasslands in California. You should check them out. But this is an incredibly diverse area. How diverse? There was a pizza box sized square put on the ground, and botanist Brett Budock in 2018 in Pennsylvania Prairie found 46 species in a quarter-meter quadrat. That is insane. It is, in fact, so insane, it is the world record. Right here in Missouri, we have the world record for number of species within a quarter-meter quadrat. It is just life upon life upon life in a innumerable amount of ways to do it. And all of these plants, all this diversity, and all this biomass over thousands of years developed a mollisol, a sol referring to our classification of soils. So if you go into agronomy and the study of soils, we have a taxonomy of soils so we can give names to things and understand what soil we're looking at. A mollisol is a deep organic soil. So the top layer of a soil is called an A horizon. And in mollisols, the A horizon is just full of organic matter, nearly a meter deep. So like 32 inches of just straight organic matter, just old grass and decomposed forbs, all of that. But most of that biomass is attributed to the prairie grasses that are really prominent in the tall grass prairie. So prairie dropseed, Sparabus heterolepis, little blue stems, Schizachyrium scoparium, big blue stem, Andropogon gerardii. At this point, from now on, all these grasses are like 8 feet tall at their most. Feather grass or Indian grass or Gastrum nutans, switchgrass or Panagum virgatum, and then prairie cordgrass, Sparabulus michianus. I'm not sure how French ended up in Latin etymology, but that's a weird epithet. But this goes from dry to wet. So prairie cordgrass is a wet prairie species exclusively, and prairie dropseed is a pretty dry species almost exclusively. These grasses and a lot of their wildflowers that they'll grow between their bases have incredibly deep roots. They can exceed 10 feet in depth, and this is a drought adaptation spurred on by the fact that they have a lot of rainwater and thus have the capacity to do these crazy things with their bodies. But this depth creates a retention of soil, so it's not going anywhere. It prevents erosion, and it creates complex structures, and it allows for the retention of moisture too. So if you go down even on really dry days, there will still be this humidity at the bottom of the ground. So not only is there moisture just radiating from the ground, just like within 6 inches of it, but a vast majority of the biomass and moisture and activity is below the ground. The tall grass prairie on top is just an expression of what is going on beneath it. And beneath it, there's all sorts of habitat for subterranean creatures. If you go beyond the tall grass prairie, you get the prairie dogs. They're really critical to the mixed grass and short grass. But here we have all sorts of ants and small mammals and ground nesting bees and all sorts of pupating beetles. It's crazy. There's so much going on underneath. We're just beginning to understand it. And with between these ginormous grasses are all these wildflowers. And these wildflowers mostly have a lot of diversity within some select families. Now, there are hundreds of species of these, but the big ones, the big hitters are Asteraceae, your sunflowers. You actually see some compass plant really tall in that photo. It's the one that's exceeding all of the rest of the vegetation. That's an Asteraceae member. Fabaceae, your purple prairie clover, your lead plant. Lamiaceae, your mints. So these are often really ethnobotanically really important because they have a lot of volatile compounds and have been used in some traditional medicines. So bee balm is a critical one. American germander. You have rosaceae, which are critical foodstuffs, your plums and your cherries, and also your prairie roses. And of course, everyone's favorite, Apoxinaceae, the milkweeds, also dogbane too. But milkweeds, there are dozens of species of milkweeds all throughout the range of the tall grass prairie. But within where I live, there are about 8 or 9 that you will see, including a federally endangered species, Asclepias medii, the Mead's sedge. Now, you have this area that is so productive, that is so diverse, and it has created this soil that is so complex and rich in organic matter. When the political project of the United States was started and there was westward expansion, this was soon to be realized. Holy crap, this is some of the most arable land in the world. This is some of the best agriculture in the world to be had. And thus, very quickly, the tall grass prairie became some of the most endangered ecosystems in the world. And I give a content warning. There are animal bones and natural disasters on the next 2 slides. And I'll give you a second to decide what's best for you. 3 and 2 and 1. So we had all these bison. We had all of this land. We had all of this complexity and diversity. But once this was realized by the United States that this was actually not a great desert, as some of the early explorers said it was, this is actually some of the most arable land in the world, there was a political project to remove the indigenous populations that inhabit this land and rely upon this land and will defend it. And the way that they begun to do that is by killing the bison. The bison was not overhunted. It was deliberately wiped out. We got down to 1,000 individuals in North America. This photo is a photo of a stack of skulls in Detroit that were collected from the slaughter of the bison. So 30 to 60 million bison were killed. And we now have 350,000 due to conservation efforts, but all of those hundreds of thousands of bison that we now have are all descendants of those remaining 1,000 and some. And after they were able to extirpate the bison and the people, they were able to convert 96% of the tall grass prairie into agriculture. When with the invention of the steel plow, the prairie was lost. And that was not without consequence. When you kill the prairie, the mixed grass, short grass, and tall grass, all of that mollisol, all of that particulate matter is free. And year after year, the degrading of the organic matter in those soils allowed for one of the worst natural disasters in human history, the Dust Bowl. And that was directly related to the collapse of an ecosystem. That is what that looks like. And so what is remaining of the tall grass prairie is our hope for the future. And we don't have a lot of it remaining. In Illinois, the prairie state, 1/100th of 1% is remaining. It was millions of acres, now down to 2,000. That is about the size of Swope Park. That is what is remaining in Illinois. In Missouri, we have about 40,000 acres. That's 0.5% of the original prairie. And half of that is publicly owned, including the NGOs and nonprofits that manage it. And from that point on, it's a little bleak. But the major stronghold that is left is a really weird tall grass prairie. It's one that has a really shallow mollisol, the one that's actually really rocky. It's called the Flint Hills out in Kansas. The Kanza Biological Station, hosted by K-State, is centered in the Flint Hills, and it is the stronghold for the tall grass that is remaining. In fact, it is 80% of the remaining tall grass in the world. And John Madsen, devotee of the prairie, author of Where the Sky Began, wrote about this. Quote, "There are only a few tall prairies left today, but they are worth seeking, worth going to and being in. They're the last lingering scraps of the old time, fragments of the original wealth and beauty, cloaked with plants that you may have never seen before, may never see again." And these places still exist. There are still last stands. This photo I took of Snowball Hill Prairie was last year, and you can still visit these places, and they are a value that exceeds explanation. They are hope that there's a future worth living into. And it's really insane, because when you just talk about the prairie, you tend to forget that these woody species also lived alongside them, introducing these complex mosaics and gradients of landscapes that went from less than 10% of canopy with this big open prairie all the way to these shade-loving trees with multiple layers of canopy, with wild edibles and complex ecological relations that may have never see the sun, and the savanna and woodland in between. So this gradient over thousands of years washed like a tide back and forth right in this temperate prairie region, thus creating a lot of diversity, in addition to the diversity that's already been had in the tall grass. So I think we're ready to ask the next question, which is, where am I in the temperate prairie region? I am in the Western Corn Belt and Central Irregular Plains. Not much here for us to get into, but this just details the topography and the human usage. Western Corn Belt has been mostly converted because it's really flat. The Central Irregular Plains has seen a lot of conversion, but it does have quite a few bits remaining. So like the Osage Plains, down farther south into Kansas and into southern Missouri, is where we see a lot of the last remaining Missourian prairies. And this Central Irregular Plains is really due to the topography. That's its main attribute. So beyond that, I think that we're ready to ask the next question, which is, where am I in these two? This is a map. This is a map of the ecoregions level 4, which we will be getting into which ones I'm in. But this is just an appreciation of actually how specific you can get to referring to where you live. There's a power to a name. There's a power to a sense of place. And these places are distinct and unique and powerful in their own way. And where I am in Kansas City, I could be in one of 4 regions. I can be in the Osage Cuestas. I can be in the Western Osage Plains, the Missouri Alluvial Plain, or the Rolling Lost Prairie. The Osage Cuesta, we got to start with, what's a cuesta? A cuesta is Spanish for slope. And it is just a hill with a steep ridge on one side and a gradual decline on the other side. The Osage Cuestas, they have a steep eastern side and a gradual western slope on the other side. Think of IKEA off of 35 highway. That's built on a cuesta. A really good example, if you want to see a cuesta in somewhat intact, go to Cedar Niles out in Johnson County. It is amazing. It has a prairie remnant on a sloping western side, which would have likely been the state of nature. And then you have some of these really weird species that you would expect farther south, such as Menzelia oligosperma, the stick leaf. That's a county record that I found just in the past 2 weeks. And that species is thriving on these super rocky eastern facing downslopes that are all limestone, talking about edaphic adaptation and a substrate specificity. This one only grows on limestone, where we are in this part of the world. And there's a lot of wetland habitat at the bottoms of these quistas, right at that edge where the eastern slope dramatically goes up. You often will find little ravines of creeks. And this is where we get the headwaters of the Blue River, which goes 42 miles through the Kansas City metro. We also have the wooded Osage Plains going over onto the eastern side of the KC metro. There's prairies and glades. Jerry Smith Park is the last remaining prairie in the wooded Osage Plains, thanks to the KC Wildlands. And it's also all unglaciated. So some of the city is glaciated and some of it's unglaciated. This part's unglaciated. And these are a couple of blooms that you will, this is a bloom that you'll find in Jerry Smith Park, the downy gentian, Gentiana pubescenta. And there's also lots of glades. Glades are just rocky environments where there's a lot of plants that are often really calcareous. They have adapted these calcium-rich environments, and they thrive in these really dry, hot conditions, like the prickly pear, Opuntia macrorrhiza, and this is in Blue Springs, Missouri. And limestone glades are an S2. They are the second step below the most imperiled type of plant community in the state of Missouri. So they're very cool that we have so many in the KC Metro. We also have woodlands and forests. There are actually quite a few left. And they're mostly in eastern Jackson County. They are these towering oaks and hickories, just these cathedral trees. You can see my mouse. There I am in comparison with this white oak, just absolutely massive with actually kind of like prairie plants, like a prairie plant assemblage at the bottom. That's kind of pretty typical for a woodland. It's just absolutely beautiful. And these are also predominantly mostly limestone, though my colleague and I in the past year recently found a sandstone woodland in Lone Jack, RC Breeding and I. So we just recently submitted that to the Natural Heritage Database in the state of Missouri. So very cool that we have both limestone and sandstone within the KC Metro. And at the bottoms of these woodlands and forests, you have a rich spring flora, flowers that are absolutely gorgeous. They'll bloom for just 2 weeks and then they're gone. So you really have to go out there and catch them. We have the Missouri alluvial plain, which is insane that we have two huge rivers confluencing just right where I am. The Missouri River is the longest river in North America. It is huge and important. Its course was set by the glaciation, the Kansan glaciation, if you want to be specific, 100,000 years ago. This is evidenced by glacial erratics. So remember the rocks being picked up by the glaciers. This got picked up in northern Minnesota and got carried all the way to Parkville, Missouri, and just got dumped there 100,000 years ago. This rock is 700 million years older than all the rock around it. It is 1 billion with a B years old. It's just insane. So you can find the evidence of this all around the KC Metro, but the Kansas and Missouri confluencing at Caw Point is just northwest of our downtown. And some of the first records of human occupation, the Hopewell sites, are along the river. They are really, really critical for archaeological efforts and study. So the alluvial plain, what actually is alluvial? Alluvial is just referring to sediment that is water deposited. And this alluvial sediment was deposited by the once wandering river. The Missouri has changed its shape and course and width and length, not necessarily length, but it's changed its course many, many times as it has wandered across the landscape, carving out this flat plain. But now it has been mostly converted into industrial cores since it's along the river. A lot of it has been channelized, so we don't get these really crazy floods. And really, it's only survived by two places, Jackass Bend in Orick, Missouri, which is about a 45-minute drive from the KC Metro, and a bottomland forest, which you need permission from the Army for, in Fort Leavenworth, which is just about 45 minutes west up in towards like Weston. It's dominated by willows and maples and cottonwoods. It is nearly all gone, but survived by these places. And then we have the mouth of the Little Blue within the Missouri alluvial plain, which in the KC Metro is a really peculiar little spot where the Little Blue River confluences and dumps into the Missouri River, and you find all of these river species that likely are pretty representative of what was here along the banks of the Big Muddy of the Missouri, like rough kinkfoil and little mousetail. These little weirdos love floods. They love alluvial deposits and sediment, and they're distributed by the river. These rivers carry their seed down. So actually, now that we've had all these crazy rains recently, next year is likely to be a pretty interesting year to see what's come down the pipe from Nebraska and the Dakotas. And then we have the loess deposits and forgotten wetlands of the Missouri alluvial plain. Remember loess, wind deposited sediment. It is represented by Hidden Valley Park, another KC Wildlands managed park. It is insane and huge, hugely dissected. It's really, really steep these cathedral tall trees that are gripping the ground of this loose loess deposit. And there's actually quite a bit of them left, especially in the Northland where it was actually glaciated. But they were actually receiving a lot of pressure, development pressure, as Casey grows. As we're getting closer to the World Cup, these are some of the most critical points of conservation, given that a lot of these lands are on either unobserved county land or they're on private property. Furthermore, the riverine wetlands, these little pockets of aquatic systems and semi-aquatic systems deposited by the river, are almost all gone. So it's really hard to really figure out what was here, but there are suspicions that there are fens left in Sibley. It just is mostly on railroad land and private land up in the northeastern corner of Jackson County. The Lusk Prairie, the final one just north of the Missouri alluvial plain towards Smithville, is globally insecure. It is of the arable land. It is incredibly arable. Thus, it has been converted almost entirely. Supposedly, it's all lost in the KC Metro. If you go up north on 35 and 29, you may find bits and pieces of it off the sides of highways. But if you want to see it intact, go to the Star School Hill Prairie. It's a day trip north of Kansas City. I believe it's an hour and a half to 2 hours of a drive. You can stop in Weston along the way. It's beautiful up there. And it's gorgeous. It's this deep loess deposit with an even deeper O horizon on these steep slopes. It's this marriage of time and of wind and of life that is really hard to put into words. So obviously much has changed in the KC Metro, and really I hope to share all this information with you to realize that the places that we have left are so precious. They are places that we need to learn more about, that I think that we can learn a lot from. They are places that we can attempt to replicate in our horticulture, though inevitably will fail at this complexity. We can at least attempt to stitch back together the living skin of the earth from the few bits and scraps of the old time, from those bits and scraps that we can weave this back together. So the next session is to take this information of what was in Kansas City and discuss specifically what is native to these ecosystems. What are the smaller components that we can use when we want to plant native? And we also can have discussions on where do we get these plant materials, where do we get seed, where do we get spores, and how do we plant it? How do we get it into the ground, ensuring that they will persist, and how do we take care of them, ensuring that they will persist? And that is what I have for you all tonight.